They called it a relic before the censors finished resolving it. The Council flagship's assessment chamber was quiet, antiseptic, and confident. Holograms settled into elegant layers. One unknown human warship drifted at the edge of the grid, a mass heavy, angular, inefficient by every aesthetic metric the Council prized. The analyst caste spoke in practiced calm, translating contempt into data tags. Hull geometry obsolete, heat signatures crude, drive emissions loud enough to be embarrassing. A relic. Processing queues spun up automatically. This was not a battle. It was sanitation. 10,000 vessels held formation at a respectful 40,000 kilometers, their energy arrays synchronized, their firing solutions already complete. Against them, a single human contact and 66 escorts that barely qualified as warships by Council standards. The numbers did not suggest resistance. They suggested delay measured in seconds. Primitive construction, the senior assessor said, voice smooth. Kinetic bias detected, no coherent energy harmonics. Laughter rippled, restrained but genuine. Kinetics were for species that had not learned elegance. Armor was a concession to fear. The Council had evolved past both. Tag. The humans as processing grade, a junior functionary flagged the human broadcast. It was brief, calm, no coded flourish, no plea. A statement of refusal and a notice of intent. Evacuation corridors declared. 6 hours offered. The chamber dismissed it without comment. Refusal was irrelevant when law was enforced by volume. 10,000 power curves rose in unison. They logged the human's posture as defiant ignorance. Processing orders queued. A single line of notation caught the assessor's eye. Human ships were not spreading. They were tightening. 67 signatures aligned into a compact wedge, overlapping sensor shadows, massing like something accustomed to impact. The maneuver was inefficient. It wasted space. Curious, someone murmured. The range ticked down by accident, or so it seemed. Council doctrine favored standoff clarity. The humans drifted forward at a lazy vector, drives flaring without elegance, closing from 40,000 to 35,000 kilometers, with no attempt to mask the burn. No feint, no deception, still relics. The firing order finalized. Energy budgets green across the board. Casualty projections rounded to 0 on the Council side. The galaxy's largest multi-species fleet prepared to erase an anachronism in under 4 minutes. They did not bother to open a war channel. Under the grid, one quiet annotation updated. Human hull mass exceeded projections by 18%, ignored numbers. Don't lie, relics don't endure. The first volley was seconds away, and the chamber waited, certain, already bored, for the grid to clear so the next system could be processed. The human reply arrived without modulation or deference. It cut across the Council's command lattice as a plain text transmission, unencrypted, wideband, and unmistakably deliberate. No anthem, no flourish. Just a voice, level and unhurried, carried by a carrier wave so simple it bordered on insulting. This is a notice of refusal. The chamber stilled. Analysts exchanged glances, some amused, some irritated. Refusal implied parity. Parity was, "Not on the board," the voice continued, neither raised nor rushed. "You are inside a civilian transit envelope. We are opening evacuation corridors on vectors marked Alpha through Delta. Window duration, 6 hours. Capacity, 20,000 souls. Use them." A schematic overlaid the tactical grid. 4 clean lanes, carved through contested space, shielded by projected interference fields. The math was visible. The routes were real. They cut directly through Council formation geometry, forcing minor realignments if acknowledged. The senior assessor frowned. "They presume authority. They presume mercy," another corrected, with a thin smile. The Council's legal caste logged the transmission as non-compliant propaganda. Evacuation corridors were a privilege granted by recognized powers. Humans were not recognized. The corridors were therefore irrelevant. Dismissal orders propagated. No change to firing schedule. The human voice returned, steady as before. We will not fire on evacuation traffic. We will fire on combatants who obstruct it. A pause, not dramatic, procedural. This is your final notice. Silence followed. No countdown. No threat inflation. Just the quiet implication that the statement was complete. Laughter surfaced again, sharper this time. Obstruction was the Council's natural state. 10,000 ships did not move for ultimatums issued by relics. The evacuation lanes were ignored, their projected tonnage estimates flagged as theatrical exaggeration. 20 million was an absurd figure, the kind primitive species used to sound consequential. Energy arrays finished cycling. At 32,000 kilometers, the human formation adjusted again. Drives flared brighter. The wedge tightened until individual hulls nearly overlapped on sensor returns. It was an ugly configuration, brute force and unapologetic. Armor faces turned forward, thick and dull, absorbing stray sensor pings without attempt at elegance. Why close? A junior analyst asked. They gained nothing. The answer did not arrive in time. Council Command issued the final compliance demand, a ritual more than a necessity. It cited statutes, preservation mandates, and the inefficiency of resistance. The demand went unanswered. On the tactical grid, evacuation corridors remained open. Empty, for now. 6 hours offered, no one listening. The firing order pulsed amber, then green. Capacitors reached threshold. 10,000 ships, aligned on a single solution. The kind that ended conversations permanently. The human formation did not slow. At 30,000 kilometers, the unknown human warship shifted half a degree, bringing its forward mass fully to bear. No weapons ports opened, no counterfire prepared. Just momentum, building, patient and undeniable. The council chamber watched, still confident, as the first contact moment passed, not with a shot, but with a refusal that did not need to be repeated. The volley was supposed to be decisive. 10,000 emitters discharged in choreographed perfection, a lattice of coherent light spanning 30,000 kilometers in less than a heartbeat. Colors outside human vision flared and collapsed into lethal focus. The council had ended civilizations with less. The chamber leaned forward, already preparing to log debris fields. The beams struck. They did not burn. They did not shear. They did not even splash. On the grid, the human formation bloomed with soft halos as energy washed across hulls and vanished. Not reflected, not dispersed. Gone. Absorbed into armor faces that drank it down without visible stress. Heat maps climbed, then flattened, as if a ceiling had been reached and politely enforced. "Penetration?" the senior assessor asked. "0," came the answer. "Across all bands, 0%. A ripple of unease replaced the earlier laughter. Secondary arrays fired, shifting frequencies, stacking harmonics, multiplying output by a factor of 3. The beams hit harder, brighter, long enough to melt moons. The humans held. Thermal overlays updated. Human hull temperatures peaked, then stabilized. Heat budgets scrolled into view, obscene in their margins. Where council doctrine allowed a 12% buffer before cascade failure, human ships showed 41% headroom remaining after full impact. "Impossible," someone whispered. The systems officer swallowed. "They're converting energy to mass displacement and sink. It's inefficient, but stable." Inefficient meant durable. Durable meant terrifying. Energy vanished. The unknown human warship took the brunt, its forward armor glowing dull red, before dimming again. No alarms, no loss of attitude. The escorts tucked tighter, overlapping fields, sharing load like something practiced at being hit. The wedge did not break. It advanced, drive steady, closing another 2,000 kilometers under. Continuous fire, Council Command ordered a saturation spike. Capacitors dumped reserves. Output surged to 180% nominal for 12 seconds, a gamble never taken lightly. The beams fused into a single blinding spear. Dead light. The spear died on contact. Sensor returns showed a brief, localized flare as energy disappeared into layered plates measured in meters, not centimeters. Human heat sinks flared white, then bled excess into space as controlled venting. Radiators deployed like blunt petals and retracted once equilibrium returned. Efficiency. Loss? The assessor demanded. 68% absorbed, the analyst said, voice tight. 32% redirected to inert mass and vented. Net structural impact, negligible. The room fell silent. Doctrine unraveled in real time. Energy. Weapons were the end of history. Everyone knew that. Everyone except the humans, apparently, who had decided to live where history could not reach them. On the grid, Council ships began to drift. Not retreat. Micro-adjustments as captains compensated for wasted fire, for power curves that no longer meant anything. Formation integrity slipped by 3%, then 5%, as commanders argued over solutions that had always worked before. Fiend, human broadcast returned, unchanged in tone. Energy fire ineffective. Evacuation corridors remain open. 6 hours remain. No taunt, no emphasis, just data. A junior legal officer opened their mouth, then closed it. There was no statute for this. No precedent for a species that let you exhaust your best weaponry without comment. The humans closed another 1,000 kilometers. Heat budgets refreshed again. Still green. For the first time, casualty projections updated on the Council side. Not rounded. Not theoretical, real numbers, small but climbing, driven by reactor strain and misaligned shields under continuous output. The chamber understood then that the first reversal had already happened. The light was dead. Distance stopped behaving the way Doctrine promised. The human formation surged, drives flared from steady to brutal, a unified burn that ignored elegance and embraced force. Acceleration climbed past safe Council tolerances, in seconds, then kept going. Sensors struggled to track vectors as the wedge leapt forward, crossing 10,000 kilometers in under half a minute. Acceleration reading? The assessor snapped. 0.32C, came the reply. Sustained. Murmurs broke containment. Council ships could sprint in short bursts, carefully staged to preserve shields and crew. This was different. This was a species willing to let mass and inertia speak. Crews braced for punishment their hulls could take. At 20,000 kilometers, the human formation split, not into chaos, but into controlled subwedges, each maintaining overlap and mutual coverage. 67 ships moved as one organism, closing angles, compressing space. The grid tightened around them like a noose that refused to hold. Council captains began to maneuver, finally. Lateral shifts, vertical offsets, attempts to restore standoff geometry. The problem was time. Every adjustment cost seconds, and seconds were being erased by human thrust. Formation integrity degraded by 8%, then 12%. Maintain. Spacing, command ordered. They couldn't. Energy fire had lost meaning, and maneuvering under continuous burn strained shields and crews alike. Reactors that had been pushed past 180% nominal began to show faults. 2 cruisers dropped out of the firing lattice, their shields flickering as safeties tripped. The humans did not target them. They passed through the gap without comment, drives, still burning, armor still forward. The wedge reformed on the other side, tighter than before. They're not chasing, they're compressing. At 12,000 kilometers, Council sensors finally picked up human kinetic signatures spooling. Massive, crude, by aesthetic standards, unmistakable by physics. Rail assemblies aligned along forward spines. Missile bays cycled behind armored shutters. The humans had waited until distance was a formality. "Break formation!" someone shouted. Too late. Formation integrity fell to 18% as captains made individual survival calculations. Elegant lines bent into uneven arcs. Shield overlaps failed. Blind spots opened. Small at first, then cascading as human subwedges exploited them with simple, ruthless math. The unknown human warship shifted again, a precise half-degree correction that brought its mass directly into the densest cluster of Council hulls. It did not slow, it did not signal, it trusted its armor and its people. Council command authorized emergency dispersal, a last resort that sacrificed cohesion for space. Ships peeled away, drives flaring in panicked bursts. The grid fractured into thousands of independent tracks. The humans followed the physics, not the panic. Acceleration held at 0.32 c. Distance collapsed to 8,000 kilometers, then 6,000. The human broadcast did not return. There was nothing left to say. Casualty counters on the Council side ticked upward from secondary effects alone. Reactor scrams, crew injuries under sustained thrust, shield collapses that had no business happening in a war that was supposed to be clean. At 5,000 kilometers, the first Council captains understood what the humans had built their doctrine around. If you cannot stop the closing vector, the fight is already over. The human formation locked its angles, every ship exactly where it needed to be, and the space between fleets vanished into inevitability. The first human shot was not dramatic, it was measured. At 4,800 kilometers, the unknown human warship authorized fire, not a barrage, a solution. Forward rails spun up with a sound sensors, translated as mass screaming down constrained paths. Capacitors dumped into coils built to survive it. 12 slugs launched, each weighed 120 metric tons. Each left the rails at a calculated fraction of light, spaced by microseconds, sequenced to arrive as one event. No guidance, no correction, just math. They crossed the gap in under a second. Council shields failed like paper soaked in rain. Energy barriers, optimized for dispersion and elegance, had no answer for momentum that did not care. The slugs punched through the lead cruiser's prow, exited through its aft quarter, and kept going, ripping into the carrier behind it. 2 hulls died to 1 line of fire. Kill confirmation, 2 ships, time to impact, 0.9 seconds. Missile bays opened across the human formation. Not flashy swarms, but disciplined lattices. 960 launches in the first wave, each missile dumb by Council standards and lethal by human ones. They flew in tight packets, using sheer numbers and staggered detonation to confuse. Point defenses built to dual piers, not survive storms. Council counterfire reacted late. Interceptors shredded dozens of missiles, then hundreds, but the math favored the humans. Detonations bloomed inside shield gaps already stressed by rail impacts. Nuclear signatures flared, low yield by human reckoning, city killers by anyone else's. 3 more Council ships vanished in overlapping flashes. Formation integrity collapsed to 0. The elegant line broke. Council command tried to reassert control, issuing target priorities and withdrawal vectors. The orders arrived to ships already dying. Human fire did not chase fleeing hulls. It cut lanes, severing clusters, isolating groups so completely that coordination became impossible. At 3,500 kilometers, the humans adjusted cadence. Rails cycled. Again. Slower now, paired with missile salvos timed to follow penetrations. Slugs opened wounds. Missiles made them fatal. It was not rage. It was procedure. A Council battleship attempted a desperate ram, dumping power into engines and lunging toward the human wedge. Human sensors flagged the vector, solved it, and responded with a single nuclear intercept at 2,000 kilometers. The detonation sheared the battleship in half without touching its neighbors. Casualty counter, +1. They could have erased everything. They didn't. Human fire avoided ships broadcasting civilian compliments. Algorithms filtered targets with cold precision, sparing evacuation-capable hulls, even as combatants around them were dismantled. The evacuation corridors, ignored minutes earlier, flickered to life as smaller vessels broke and ran, slipping through lanes the humans honored without exception. You fired first, we finished it. At 2,000 kilometers, debris fields thickened. Council. Ships collided with their own wreckage, shields down, hulls already compromised. Secondary explosions chained through formations that no longer existed. Elegant designs undone by physics they had dismissed as primitive. Human escorts advanced through the chaos, armor scarred, heat sinks venting, crews steady. Not a single human hull was breached. Damage reports scrolled in calm text, all within tolerance. Missile count remaining 6,400 railgun barrels. Green dot nuclear intercepts expended. 14. The first cut ended not with a crescendo, but with silence where the Council's proudest ships had been. Space cleared in jagged swaths, and the human formation slowed, just enough to reassess. The fight was no longer a contest. It was an operation. This was not chaos. It was definition. As the debris settled into predictable vectors, the human broadcast returned, unchanged in tone, unchanged in pace. It threaded through open channels and emergency bands alike, impossible to miss and impossible to mistake for theater. "This engagement is not punitive," the voice said. "It is corrective." On the tactical grid, new overlays appeared. Not targets. Limits. Casualty caps rendered in calm white numerals, exclusion zones drawn with precise geometry around evacuation corridors that were now filling fast. Civilian traffic surged through alpha and beta lanes, transponders flaring as frightened crews realized. Too late that the offer had been real. Evacuation count ticked upward. 3.2 million. Then 4.7. Then 6.1. Council Command tried to jam the feed. It failed. The signal rode on redundancy and brute power, the same philosophy the humans had applied to armor and thrust. "You were warned," the human voice continued, "not as accusation but as record. You were offered time, 6 hours. You chose minutes." A senior council jurist demanded response authority, citing emergency sovereignty. The chamber ignored them. The law had lost relevance when it could not protect its enforcers. The human message expanded, pulling in context the council had never allowed to be spoken in its presence. Archived rulings, forced compliance actions, species designations reduced to processing classes. The language was clinical, stripped of outrage, more damning for it. "This war is bounded," the voice said. "Civilian casualties are capped at 0 by intent. Military casualties are capped by compliance." Numbers appeared beside the words. Projected losses if resistance continued. Projected losses if surrender was accepted. The difference was not subtle. Casualty delta, 18,400 lives. The chamber felt the shift ripple outward as distant systems tuned in. Observers became witnesses. Witnesses became record. Council captains, isolated and bleeding, finally understood the trap they were in. Every shot they fired now was logged not just as aggression, but as choice. The humans were not merely winning, they were building a case. On the grid, human ships maneuvered with restraint, cutting power when targets disengaged, holding fire when evacuation traffic crossed their arcs. A damaged council frigate drifted through Corridor Gamma, shields flickering, drives dead. Human escorts adjusted course by meters to avoid frightening it. No pursuit, no finishing blow. Dominance, then restraint. Evacuation count crossed 12 million. A junior analyst whispered what no one else would. "They're not here to conquer." The senior assessor said nothing. There was no category for what this was in council doctrine. Enforcement assumed inevitability. The humans had introduced accountability. "This action concludes upon cessation of hostile fire," the broadcast said. "Prisoners will be taken, trials will be public, aid will follow." The word trials landed harder than any rail slug. At the edges of the grid, human ships repositioned, not to press advantage, but to stabilize space, corralling debris, marking safe lanes, projecting shields outward to protect those fleeing a fleet that had once promised them order. Evacuation count, 19.6 million. The galaxy-scale stakes crystallized in that moment. This was not a battle over territory or tribute. It was a line being drawn, enforced not by rhetoric, but by math, mass, and a refusal to look away. "This is what this is," the human voice concluded, and for the first time, there was something, like finality in it. The realization did not arrive all at once. It crept in through the margins of the tactical picture, through patterns that no longer fit the story the Council had been telling itself. Human ships were not improvising. They were executing phases, clean transitions, pre-planned arcs that assumed resistance would fail exactly this way. Containment rings appeared on the grid, wide, invisible to weapons logic, undeniable to navigation. Human vessels that had not fired a shot moved into positions far beyond the immediate battle space, projecting fields and interdiction zones that boxed the remains of the Council fleet into a shrinking volume. They had planned for this scale. Additional. Contacts, an analyst said, voice tight. Outer vectors, human signatures. The grid expanded, not reinforcements rushing in, but assets already in place. Logistics hulls, hospital ships, fleet tenders, 32 of them positioned at precise distances, synchronized with evacuation. Corridors and debris drift models. They had arrived hours earlier, silent, ignored because no one had bothered to look past the guns. This wasn't a duel. It never was. Council Command searched for the expected signal. Some call to allies. Some reveal of a grand coalition backing the humans. There was none. The humans were alone here by choice, but not isolated. Their doctrine assumed no help and required none. Data packets followed the broadcast, flooding open channels. Not propaganda, briefings. Doctrine summaries stripped of classification because secrecy no longer mattered. The humans outlined their approach with the same calm they had used to announce evacuation lanes. Phase 1, absorb and close. Phase 2, break cohesion. Phase 3, contain and stabilize. Phase 4 was listed but grayed out. A council tactician recognized the structure and went still. This is counterinsurgency doctrine, they said softly. Scaled up, scaled to fleets. Human preparation unfolded in quiet details. The overlapping armor faces were designed not just to survive energy fire, but to share load across formations. The acceleration profiles matched long-duration crew conditioning programs, not emergency sprints. Even the missile counts told a story. 9,600 launched, yes, but tens of thousands held back, reserved for contingencies that had not been triggered. They expected this to take longer. On the grid, human ships rotated through firing and cooling, cycles with metronomic discipline. Damaged council vessels were tagged, tracked, and herded away from combat zones, boxed by non-lethal fields that denied escape without inflicting further harm. Prisoner collection began before surrender was formally offered. Numbers scrolled in the margins. Prisoners secured, 4,200, then 7,800. Medical triage units deployed within minutes, human medics working on non-human bodies without hesitation or ceremony. This is a policing action, the senior assessor said, the words tasting wrong. On a fleet scale, no one contradicted them. The human broadcast, updated once more, brief and procedural. Containment perimeter established, hostile fire reduced to 12% of initial volume, projected cessation within 90 seconds. It was not a threat, it was a schedule. Council captains, still capable of thought, understood the final insult in that moment. The humans were not reacting to them. They were managing them, the way one managed disasters or outbreaks, with protocols written long before first. Contact casualty delta stabilized. Evacuation count finalized at $20,000 exactly. The last transports clearing corridor delta as human ships adjusted fields to seal the lanes behind them. The Council's Grand Fleet, assembled to enforce inevitability, sat broken inside a containment box it had never imagined someone would build. Phase 4 remained grayed out. No one wanted to see it light up. 4 minutes was the margin they had given it. From the first rail impact to containment collapse, the counter on the human command feed rolled with indifferent precision. No flourish, no dramatic emphasis. Just time. Counted because time mattered. The remaining council ships fired sporadically now, disorganized bursts that flared and died against armor that had already proven the point. Hostile fire volume dropped from 12% to 7%, then to 4%, as reactors failed and targeting solutions degraded under constant pressure. Human ships moved, not in a charge, in a sweep. Sub-wedges peeled off, each assigned a volume of space measured in cubic kilometers and seconds to clear it. Rails fired in pairs, not to destroy but to disable, engine clusters, command spines, weapon mounts. Missile salvos followed, smaller now, surgical, detonating with yields tuned to avoid chain reactions in already breached hulls. Kill count advanced in steady increments. 1, 3, 5. At 2,600 kilometers, a cluster of Council destroyers attempted a coordinated break, dumping everything into a single acceleration burn. Human interceptors responded within 0.4 seconds. 4 nuclear intercepts bloomed ahead of the vector, not close enough to vaporize, close enough to shred. The destroyers emerged broken, tumbling, drives gone. Prisoner beacons activated automatically. Human escorts slid in, fields expanding, cutting the wrecks out of the fight without another shot. Ruthless, controlled. The counter ticked past 2 minutes. Council. Command attempted a final gambit, ordering all remaining ships to converge on the unknown human warship, massing fire in one desperate effort to prove that nothing was invulnerable. The convergence never completed. Human containment fields flexed, denying angles, forcing ships into staggered arrivals that stripped the effort of meaning. Rails answered again. At 1 to 800 kilometers, 3 capital hulls were holed in sequence, slugs passing through multiple targets before disintegrating into plasma beyond. Missile lattices followed, timed to the millisecond, ensuring that no ship could use another's wreckage as cover. You cannot hide inside broken geometry. The casualty counter climbed, then slowed, then steadied, as resistance evaporated. Human. Fire tapered accordingly, shifting from destruction to denial. Drives were neutralized. Power cores scrammed. Weapons went cold. At 3 minutes, hostile fire dropped below 1%. A single Council cruiser, its hull intact but systems dead, drifted. Across Corridor Alpha's former boundary, human ships adjusted by meters to avoid collision. No one fired, a docking clamp extended, prisoners were taken. Mercy followed dominance, on schedule. The 4-minute mark approached, and with it, the end of the operation's violent phase. The grid showed no coherent enemy formations remaining, only isolated hulls, tagged and boxed, awaiting processing that no longer meant erasure. The human broadcast updated one final time during the fighting. Hostile fire at 0.8%. Ceasefire conditions met. Rails went silent, missile bays sealed, human ships did not cheer, they reconfigured. Damage control drones deployed, medical traffic spiked. Logistics hulls moved in, exactly as planned, their arrival times matching projections written before the first shot was fired. The counter rolled over to 4 Gao. 4 minutes, that's all it took. What remained of the Council's Grand Fleet sat immobilized inside a lattice of human control. Weapons offline, power constrained, futures abruptly uncertain. The galaxy watched the numbers settle into stillness, the way one watched a storm pass and realized the landscape had changed. Human ships held position, engines idling, armor scarred but unbroken. The operation had ended not with annihilation, but with quiet dominance so complete it felt inevitable in hindsight. 4 minutes was not a boast. It was a benchmark. The terms were transmitted after the guns went quiet. No ultimatum preceded them. No victory speech followed. The document arrived on every open channel as a structured packet, clear language, numbered clauses, timestamps attached. It assumed attention because attention was no longer optional. Hostilities have ceased, the human voice said, returning once more unchanged. What follows is process. The grid reflected the shift immediately. Human ships powered down weapon systems in visible stages, rails cooling, missile bays sealed. Containment fields remained, firm but non-lethal. Council vessels, immobilized and tagged, drifted in controlled. Vectors, no longer targets but responsibilities. Prisoner collection expanded methodically. Boarding teams crossed distances measured in tens of meters, not kilometers now. No forced breaches. Airlocks cycled. Wounded were stabilized where they lay. Species differences were logged and accommodated without comment. Prisoners secured, 18,400, medical aid followed within minutes. Human triage units deployed across the containment volume, their protocols ruthless about survival and indifferent to allegiance. Pain relief first, bleeding second, questions later. This action does not authorize summary punishment, the terms stated. All detained personnel will receive public trial under jointly observed standards. The word public mattered. It echoed through council space like a crack in a long-sealed wall. Trials meant evidence. Evidence meant records. Records meant that enforcement actions once buried under doctrine would be examined by eyes that had never been allowed to look. Council legal authorities attempted to assert jurisdiction. The human response was immediate and calm. Jurisdiction is shared. Oversight is mandatory. Proceedings will be broadcast. No argument followed. There was no leverage left to apply. Aid clauses activated next. Human logistics hulls released cargo, power cells, medical supplies, structural foam, atmosphere processors, directed first to damaged council ships with civilian complements still aboard. Evacuation corridors, now closed, were replaced by stabilization zones guarded by human shields. You broke the order. We will hold it together. The political pivot rippled outward faster than any weapon ever had. Member species that had sent token detachments to the Council fleet began transmitting acknowledgements. Not surrender. Recognition. Recognition that something fundamental had shifted, and that pretending otherwise would only make it worse. The terms were explicit about limits. No annexation, no tribute, no permanent occupation. Human forces would withdraw upon completion of trials and transition of enforcement authority to a reformed, multi-species body with audited powers. Compliance milestones appeared beside each. Clause, dates, verification methods, consequences spelled out without threat inflation. Failure to comply would not mean war. It would mean resumption of containment. Council command, what remained of it, signed. The signature did not feel like defeat. It felt like exposure. Human ships adjusted formation again, opening space, loosening the box just enough to signal trust, without relinquishing control. It was a balance struck deliberately, one the Council had never learned to manage. As the first trial notices were issued and the first aid convoys docked, the galaxy watched a power choose restraint after proving it did not need to. The human voice concluded the transmission with a final line, almost administrative in its tone. These terms take effect immediately. And just like that, the old order stopped pretending it was inevitable. The line moved after the signing. Human ships did not linger in victory posture. They transitioned smoothly into something else. Weapons stayed cold, sensors widened. Their navigation grids expanded outward, beyond the debris, beyond the systems that had just rewritten their politics. Containment became guardianship. Logistics hulls detached from the main formation and pushed toward damaged worlds flagged during the engagement, places the Council fleet had passed without stopping, places whose distress signals had been logged and deprioritized. Human crews worked without ceremony, deploying power, food, atmosphere, time. On the strategic grid, a new layer faded in, outer systems, sparse traffic, long gaps between stars, the edge where law had always thinned. Anomalous activity, a sensor officer reported on the human net. Outer rim, pattern matches exterminator doctrine. No alarm followed, no spike. Imposture. Just confirmation, the data was shared, immediately and publicly, distances measured in light years, timelines measured in months, not minutes. Loss projections that assumed inaction and showed why inaction was no longer acceptable. The galaxy watched humans do something unfamiliar. They planned forward. Exploration vessels detached, their profiles leaner, their mission sets broader. Not scouts for conquest, but surveyors and early warning nodes seeded along vectors the Council had never bothered to map properly. Guardians at the horizon, placed before the threat arrived. Beyond the line, something was moving, and it was not subtle. Council, representatives, newly constrained by their own signatures, observed the preparations in silence. This was not enforcement, it was stewardship. The humans were not asking permission. They were extending an offer the same way they had offered evacuation corridors, clearly with numbers attached. We will take point, the human broadcast. Said, for the first time addressing the wider galaxy directly. Participation is voluntary, oversight is shared, no triumph, no demand. Human fleets began to thin as ships departed on long arcs, their destinations marked by faint symbols at the edge of the map. Others held position, not as occupiers, but as anchors while something new took shape. The unknown human warship remained a moment longer, armor still scarred, heat sinks still warm. It rotated slowly, aligning its bow not toward the defeated council, but toward the dark, beyond mapped space. Final tallies scrolled across the grid. 4 minutes of battle, 20 million evacuated, 18,400 prisoners alive. In 0 civilian casualties by intent. Benchmarks met. The war had ended exactly where the humans said it would. The future, however, had not waited. Drives flared, controlled, steady, and the first wave of human ships crossed the line the Council had never defended, carrying with them a doctrine that did not stop at winning, it stopped at holding.